Welcome to Jimi Zen Reads. Hans Christian Andersen, The Daisy. Listen to my story. In the country, close by the roadside, there stands a summer house. You must certainly have seen it. In front is a little garden full of flowers, enclosed by white palings, and on a bank outside the palings there grew, amidst the freshest green grass, a little daisy. The sun shone as brightly and warmly upon the daisy as upon the splendid large flowers within the garden, and therefore it grew hourly, so that one morning it stood fully open with its delicate, white, gleaming petals, which, like rays, surrounded the little yellow sun in their centre. It never occurred to the little flower that no one saw her. Hidden as she was among the grass, she was quite contented. She turned towards the warm sun, looked at it, and listened to the lark who was singing in the air. The daisy was as happy as if it were the day of some high festival, and yet it was only a Monday. The children were at school, and whilst they sat upon their forms and learned their lessons, the little flower upon the green stalk learned from the warm sun and everything around her. How good God is! Meanwhile, the little lark expressed clearly and beautifully all she felt in silence, and the flower looked up with a sort of reverence to the happy bird who could fly and sing. It did not distress her that she could not do the same. I can see and listen. The sun shines on me, the wind kisses me. Oh, how richly am I blessed! There stood within the palings several grand, stiff-looking flowers. The less fragrance they had, the more airs they gave to themselves. The peonies puffed themselves out, in order to make themselves larger than the roses. The tulips had the gayest colours of all. They were perfectly aware of it, and held themselves as straight as a candle, that they might be the better seen. They took no notice at all of the little flower outside the palings, but she looked all the more upon them, thinking, how rich and beautiful they are. Yes, that noble bird would surely fly down and visit them. How happy am I, who live so near them, and can see their beauty. Just at that moment, the lark did fly down, but he came not to the peonies or the tulips. No, he flew down to the poor daisy in the grass, who was almost frightened from pure joy, and knew not what to think. She was so surprised. The little bird hopped about and sang, "Oh, how soft is this grass, and what a sweet little flower blooms here, with its golden heart and silver garment, for the yellow centre of the daisy looked just like gold, and the little petals around gleamed silver white." How happy the little daisy was! No one can imagine how happy. The bird kissed her with his beak, sang to her, and then flew up again into the sky. It was a full quarter of an hour ere the flower recovered herself. Half ashamed, yet completely happy, she looked at the flowers in the garden. They must certainly be aware of the honour and happiness that had been conferred upon her. They must know how delighted she was. But the tulips held themselves twice as stiff as before, and their faces grew red with anger. As to the thick-headed peonies, it was indeed well that they could not speak, or the little daisy would have heard something not very pleasant. The poor little flower could see that they were an ill humour, and she was much grieved at it. Soon after, a girl came into the garden with a knife sharp and bright. She went up to the tulips and cut off one another. "Oh, that's horrible," sighed the daisy. "It is now all over with them." The girl then went away with the tulips. How glad was the daisy that she grew in the grass outside the palings, and was a despised little flower. She felt very thankful, and when the sun set, she folded her leaves, went to sleep, and dreamed all night of the sun and the beautiful bird. The next morning, when our little flower, fresh and cheerful, again spread out all her white petals in the bright sunshine and clear blue air. She heard the voice of the bird, but he sang so mournfully. Alas, the poor lark had a good reason for sorrow. He had been caught and put in a cage close by the open window. He sang of the joys of free, unrestrained flight. He sang of the young green corn in the fields, and of the pleasure of being borne up by his wings in the air. The poor bird was certainly very unhappy. He sat a prisoner in his narrow cage. The little Daisy would so willingly have helped him, but how could she? Ah, that she knew not. She simply forgot how beautiful was all around her, how warmly the sun shone, how pretty and white were her leaves. Alas, she could only think of the imprisoned bird, whom it was not in her power to help. All at once 2 little boys came from out the garden. One of them had a knife in his hand, as large and as sharp as that which the girl had cut the tulips. They went straight up to the little Daisy, who could not imagine what they wanted. "Here, we can cut out a nice piece of turf for the lark," said one of the boys, and began to cut deep all around the Daisy, leaving her in the centre. "Tear out the flower," said the other boy, and the little Daisy trembled all over for fear, for she knew that if she were torn out that she would die, and she wished so much to live, as she was being put into the cage with the imprisoned lark. "No, leave it alone," said the first. "It looks so pretty." And so she was let alone and was put into the lark's cage. But the poor bird loudly lamented the loss of his freedom, and beat his wings against the iron bars of his cage, and the little flower could not speak, could not say a single word of comfort to him, much as she wished to do so. Thus passed the whole morning. "There is no water here," sang the captive lark. "They've all gone and forgotten me. Not a drop of water to drink. My throat is dry and burning. There is fire and ice within me, and the air is so heavy. Alas, I must die. I must leave the warm sunshine, the fresh green grass, and all the beautiful things which God has created." And then he thrust his beak into the cool grass in order to refresh himself a little. And his eye fell upon the Daisy, and the bird bowed to her and said, "Thou too wilt wither here, thou poor little flower. They have given me thee and a piece of green around thee, instead of the whole world which I possessed before. Every little blade of grass is to me a green tree, thy every white petal a fragrant flower. Alas, thou only remindest me of what I have lost." "Oh, that I could comfort him," thought the Daisy, but though she could not move a single petal, yet the fragrance which came from her delicate blossom was sweet and refreshing. The bird noticed it, and although panting with thirst, he tore the green blades. In very anguish, he did not touch the flower. It was evening, and yet no one came to bring the poor bird a drop of water. He stretched out his slender wings and shook them convulsively. His song was a mournful wail. His little head bent towards the flower, and the bird's heart broke from thirst and desire. The flower could not know, as on the preceding evening, fold together her leaves and sleep. Sad and sick, she drooped to the ground. The boys did not come back until the next morning, and when they saw the bird was dead, they wept bitterly. They dug a pretty grave, which they adorned with flower petals. The bird's corpse was put into a pretty red box and given a royal burial. Whilst he yet lived and sang, they forgot him, left him suffering in his cage, and now he was highly honoured and bitterly bewailed. But the piece of turf with the Daisy in it was thrown out into the street. No one thought of her who had felt the most for the little bird, and who had so much wished to comfort him. The end.